Mhm.
Okay, great. So, hello and welcome again to everybody. Um, Thanks for joining us wherever you are in the world. The theme that we're going to be chatting about this morning is how to win friends and influence people using the WIEGO comms approach. So, the presentation this morning is going to be led by predominantly by Megan McLeod, our copy editor Dynamo, and Toulouse Gerard, the WIEGO comms officer extraordinaire. And I'll be providing some additional commentary occasionally. So, as always, we're expecting that the presentation component of the webinar will last about 30 minutes. And then after that, we'll take your questions and comments and hope to open the floor up to discussion. Um, and when we open up the floor to discussion, we'll ask you to raise your hand. And to do that, there's a little box at the bottom of the Zoom screen, which says, should say participants. If you click participants, then it'll open up a sidebar, which says, it lists all the participants. It also says mute me and raise hand. So just click raise your hand. Or you could put a question in the chat box. So great. So I think that being said, we'll just dive right in. So if we go to the next slide. Today, we want to discuss some of the key aspects of our overall comms strategy and the ways in which the comms team can support you, and also how you can support us to make your work shine like the beacon in the dark that it is. So, as you may know, the comms team's vision statement is that we want to seize the narrative on the informal economy. So, as a comms team, we often work in two ways. It can be reactive or proactive. And over the last few years, we've made a concerted effort to shift towards a more strategic, planned approach to WIEGO communications to help us to support this vision whenever possible. So, why a strategic and planned approach? Well, it's easier to seize and control the narrative and to position ourselves as the experts on the informal economy if we can sort of set the pace and tone of the conversation and we know what debates we want to be contributing to. And so we do recognize there's always emergencies and circumstances beyond our control. So there is a need to be proactive or reactive. But we want to emphasize that there's always spaces and places in our work where it's possible to be more planned and proactive, and that can enable us to sort of push our message further and reach the people, organizations, and decision makers that we want to reach. So how we get to that is what we want to talk about today. So how does comms sort of fit into our overarching goals? The structure of the presentation is we're going to address this by looking at three processes to explain how they fit into the comm strategy. So events, photos, and publications. And I know that on the surface, these processes can sort of seem unrelated to this overall vision of seizing the narrative, but as we go through sort of the different events, publications, and photos, we'll be highlighting kind of what the end goal of each of the processes and how, with your help, we hope to achieve it. So throughout the presentation, Megan and Talua will be highlighting that, although the process is sometimes maybe a bit time consuming upfront, that they'll save us and you from having to do more work down the road, and that being proactive and taking a strategic approach and following the processes, we can spend less of our time repeating or revisiting steps and have more time to spread ourselves evenly across promoting all of the programmatic work that needs to be communicated. And next slide. So as I sort of alluded to, at the end of our presentation, we want to open up the floor to you. So for questions and discussions, you know, although we're hoping to clarify our process and goals, we want to emphasize like the processes are made to support the WIEGO programmatic team's work and that they're a work in progress. So, you know, we'd like your feedback. And we know that there are ways that we can adjust to serve you better and to, you know, reach our joint goals. So it'd be great to get your perspective on that. So if you have sort of things that come up to in your mind, you know, throughout the presentation, kind of keep them at the top of the mind. Any questions, concerns, or challenges, or ideas for how you, for what might work better for the team as a whole. We'd love to hear your thoughts during the end of the discussion. So I'm going to stop blabbering on, and I'm going to hand the floor over to Lua to talk about events, where it all gets started. So next slide.
Thank you, Kendra. So in addition to developing communications materials, one of our major functions as the WIEGO communications team is promoting WIEGO's programs and more particularly our events. For the most part, our events have two common goals, which is raising awareness or highlighting a particular message or area of our work and emphasizing the importance of why we do the work we do. And we noticed that as the interest in the informal economy continues to grow, WIEGO's events will continue to create a lasting and powerful impression of WIEGO, which is really one of our major goals, to raise the profile of WIEGO and to allow WIEGO to claim the space as a knowledge leader on the informal economy. Our events are therefore an excellent platform to showcase the great work that is being done by our programs and in our focal cities, and to raise awareness of the contribution of informal workers, but moreover, raise their voice, validity, and visibility. Next slide, please. Although we are a relatively small organization, we do quite a bit of work, and our work is also far-reaching. This is evidenced by the number of events that we host, co-host, and participate in on an annual basis, and the number of publications and communications materials we regularly produce. Given the importance of our work, as Kendra would have indicated earlier, it is very important that we strategically plan our communications and events ahead of time to ensure that we're reaching the right people and also that we're reaching them in a format that suits them. We noted that out of 166 events which were registered on the events calendar last year for the 2018 to 2019 financial year, communication support was only requested for 41 events. Now, that's great. However, the number of events that actually received communications support greatly surpassed it. Given the increasing number of events which we are involved in, which WIEGO is involved in both directly and indirectly, as in planning from the onset, when we plan ahead, this ensures that we can allocate the right amount of resources, particularly our human resources, to a particular event. This ensures that we can reach the right audiences and create the appropriate material and resources. And it also ensures that we are achieving optimal impact for our dissemination and promotion. Next slide, please. We understand how hard you all work. I mean, we all work very hard, and we value your time. So during the last 2 quarters of the previous financial year, we really sought to review the communications processes on a whole and saw where there were inefficiencies, how we could make them better. So as it relates to the events process, one of the things that we did was to create a visual graphic, which we have shared with you on the internet, and we have links at the end of this presentation so that you can access anything we discuss here. So we created a visual graphic which outlined the key steps in the communications process, which was a lot simpler than the previous Word document, which we had with lots of paragraphs. And we also moved to an electronic format of the event notification form. Now, this new form, what it does, it allows us to observe trends through the year. So it allows us to see who is following the process. So when we look at the events calendar and we see, for example, I could see, okay, there are 110 events this year. We can see how many forms we actually have for the year. So we know who followed the process, which programs are more active in terms of their request for support, the types of comms material or the types of event support which is being requested, and it allows us to plan ahead. When we had our communications team meeting in May, we realized that even though we had switched to an electronic form, we were not necessarily capturing all of the information that we needed. So we went back to the drawing board and we decided to include some very critical questions to the electronic event notification form. So some of the questions we would have included in the new form would be, on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being most important, how much of a priority for your program focal city is this event? What is the intent of this event? What do you hope the audience will do after attending, engaging with you? Which key debates, discussions will you contribute at this event? What audience do you hope to engage with at this event? All of these questions are intended to get us to think a little deeper so that when we're planning an event, we can understand, okay, should we really be allocating all of the resources that we are allocating to this? Is it really as important as we think it is? So after you've done with the form, you may very well realize, okay, maybe I don't need all of what I was thinking that I need for this event because of the amount of financial or human resources that it may require. From a financial standpoint, though, capturing critical information at the start allows us, as in us being the program directors and comms, to come to an agreement on what is required, what the scope of whatever project or event is, and the necessary costs. For example, if we decide, okay, we're doing a publication and it comes in and it's an English publication and we want to translate it into French and Spanish, and then we don't agree on the text, and then it comes back and changes are being made, we know that there will be cost implications. So this is why we try to ensure that we plan ahead and we agree upon whatever we are doing so that we can eliminate these kinds of situations. Next slide, please. The Commission on the Status of Women, this is one of the success stories that we'd have, which we'll seek to highlight why it is important to plan. CSW was held from March 11th to 22nd in New York at the UN headquarters. And our social protection team was heavily involved. They were one of the key programs representing us there. Our director of social protection participated in the high-level UN panel. And there was also participation from WIEGO partners at some notable side events. Now, what worked in this particular, for this particular event was that the event process was followed really to a T. The event notification form was completed almost 1 month prior to the event. We would send critical resource documents, background information from organizers and partners from the onset. And what was really, really great was that there were clear and concise priorities and objectives, as well as outputs stated from the beginning. So we really had a vision. We knew what we were getting into, what we needed to achieve. And the result of this was that we had adequate time to plan and execute multiple communications requests and to promote and disseminate. Kendra will speak more specifically to online dissemination later. We were able to create a comprehensive event page which highlighted not only WIEGO, but similarly our partner events. We were able to compile resources specific to the event, and we were able to ensure maximum coverage of the event across all of our platforms by the web and social media. But even with a perfect event, there are sometimes challenges. And while the event planning process was excellent, we did encounter a few difficulties on the publication side. For this same event, we were required to produce a social protection brief to be disseminated at the event. It was supposed to be in English. And as you would be aware, we require sign-off on all publications before they are sent into layout and design and translation. And this is inclusive of not just the text, but photos and accompanying captions. So we received the English version for sign-off for the English version, and it was sent to design, also sent to translation. However, when the first draft came back, there were changes made not only to the main text, but also to the photos and captions. Now, this would have impacted the translations of both the French and the Spanish, which had already been sent to the translators weeks prior. So in the end, we had the printed version of the English brief, which is what we needed. It was ready for dissemination at the event. However, the Spanish and French version were not available for upload on the website much earlier. So all this to say, it is extremely important that we follow the processes, because although there are some times that challenges will occur, but I mean it's human, the more that we plan, the more that we're able to mitigate these challenges from occurring, to prevent these challenges from occurring. So now Kendra will speak to online dissemination of the CSW event.
Thanks, Talua. So in thinking about the online dissemination, I think what really worked and helped us in this was that the event, the CSW was identified as a priority event for the social protection program, and this is important because as Talua alluded to, if there's hundreds of events that WIEGO is attending at any one time, sometimes multiple events are happening at once in different places. It can be a bit difficult to prioritize and to know, what really should take precedence or what we should be focusing on. And so it was great that the social protection team identified this event as a high priority, and held a meeting with us. They produced very targeted, a small number of very targeted pieces, including a blog, which was published on the Medium, which is a website. And they also produced, as Talua mentioned, a briefing note for the event, which spoke directly to the theme of the CSW around urban infrastructure. As well, in this conversation and in preparations for the event, key messages were identified from the briefing note, and the key events where we would be speaking were also identified. So comms knew from the outset, what we wanted to emphasize, where the key spaces where we would be speaking were, and had a broad sense of who the audience was for this. So what happened? What I can say is online, in the month of March, sort of related to these promotion efforts, we saw a spike in new followers on our Twitter feed. So 30% higher increase, 30% higher number of followers than in previous months. And the followers that we saw were people particularly interested in sort of women's rights, gender. So some examples, one of the principal research fellows from ODI, Nicola Jones. We had the Global Task Force of Local and Regional Governments begin to follow us. We had allies like VGIF, who did an event with us at the CSW, and many others. I could provide examples. As well, because we knew that we wanted to emphasize the briefing note and the blog, which spoke to urban regulation, infrastructure, and social protection. We really pushed that in the month of March, and the Medium blog, which Laura and Rachel wrote on the topic, was one of the most shared tweets during that month. It was viewed over 7,800 times, and it was shared by individuals like Winnie Bianyimaf, who's the exec director of Oxfam. So this is just to say that, when we have a planned approach and, we know that it's a priority, steps are in place to, identify the audience and the key messages, and we have the publications identified that we want to be pushing. And it was a very strategic approach, which I think was quite effective in being able to reach both people at the event, but also people
online. So great work. And I think I'll pass it next slide to Megan.
Yes. So photos. I'm sure many of you are wondering why photos? How important can they possibly be to achieving our end goal? And while I absolutely agree that of course it is the research, the thinking, the action, etc., that are the driving forces of our work, it is through images that we can draw in our intended audience, particularly in online dissemination. As noted in the slide here, when we use social images on our social media, in this example Twitter, we receive 150% more retweets than those without an image. Furthermore, our goal in comms is to shift the narrative about informal work, and sometimes images do that far better than words by putting a human face to the issues we're talking about. However, not every WIEGO event or workshop needs or has access to a professional photographer, and there are a lot of really great photographers in WIEGO, but the photos that you have don't always get to the comms team. With that in mind, I want to talk about a couple of things. One, what are WIEGO's purposes? What for WIEGO's purposes makes a good photo? And two, how can you get those photos to the comms with as little effort on your part as possible while still making it easy for comms to locate and use those photos? Next slide, please. So what makes a good photo? A good photo is pretty. Since many of you are photographers already, I think you probably are already well aware of what makes a good photo and are very likely more informed on that subject than I am. So I'm not going to get into what all the elements are of a pretty photo. However, for those of you like myself whose photography skills are somewhat lacking, there is a WIEGO tip sheet that our designer photographer Julian Luckham created. It's a short document which provides some really simple but effective tips that can up your game should you wish to do so. And I posted this to the photo and video archive folder in the WIEGO Teams Drive. What I will say about the pretty photos is that they can make a huge difference in the number of online visitors we get to the website. The example I have is somewhat anecdotal, but Carlin has noted to me that when the feature photo of a blog article is more visually appealing, we get a significant increase in the visits to that article as opposed to articles that have a photo that is blurry, not as pretty, more pixelated, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, we've been trying to up our game with those photos. A good photo is high quality. This kind of goes without saying, but really the better the quality, the more we can do with the photo, the bigger we can blow it up, et cetera, et cetera. Also, when we get our new website, this will become increasingly important because for feature photos, because in the new page layout, feature photos will be, they'll still be landscape, but they'll be much wider and much narrower, which means that for people like myself who are posting to the website, finding photos that will fit into that and have the right quality to be put into that will be a little bit more difficult. And finally, and possibly most importantly, a good photo tells a story. The great thing about having so many good photographers in WIEGO is that we do have quite a few photos that are specific to the events we take part in. And a great example is the photo shown here, taken during an OHS workshop in Belo Horizonte. The reasons this photo is so useful are because of a couple of things. It's an action photo. The images like this, where the subjects are engaging in an activity, are more useful to us than a staged photo, such as a group shot. Because the photographer narrowed in on this one incident at the workshop, I, as a viewer, can get a sense of what happened in the workshop and of the atmosphere. And as someone who often writes the captions for photos, it would be easy for me to link this into the narrative of whatever content it is being featured on. This photo also says something about the women involved. As women waste pickers, they are often stereotyped, as you well know, as being uneducated, dirty, lazy, potentially criminal, etc. But this photo changes that narrative simply by the fact that they are obviously engaged with the exercise they are taking part in. They are thoughtful here, they are talking to each other, perhaps brainstorming for a solution to an issue they face, and that is so much more effective than anything I could say in text. Another thing I want to say here, even though this particular photo might not address it, is that we also want to show workers as workers. An example of this could be some of our Getty images where workers are shown in their workspaces with the tools of their trade. And we are aware that there is only so much that you as team can do about the above conditions. Sometimes the lighting is poor or you don't have time to look around and find that perfect shot. But I still wanted to highlight these just so that you are aware of what we on the comms team are looking for and why. Next slide, please. So how to send in your photos. I wanted to address this rather mundane aspect of photos because I know that it can take up a lot of people's time, which is a precious commodity in WIEGO. We have adjusted a couple things in this process based on some feedback from the team to hopefully cut down on both your time spent on this and ours. We won't go into too into depth into it here, but here are some of the basics. You have photos, where do you put them? On the comms team, we have a few people who might need to access photos, but primarily this would be Kendra as the social media guru and myself as the photo archivist. What we want to avoid is team members having to upload photos to multiple platforms to share with different people. Also, for the sake of your comms team, we want to avoid making Kendra or myself search in various places for a certain photo. Therefore, we would like the team to upload photos to their folder in the Video and Photos for Archive folder in WIEGO's Team Drive. You can create your own subfolder with your name, or you can ask me to create that for you and upload your photos there. For those of you who like to take pictures with your phones, you can also download the Google Drive app and upload directly to your folder from your phone. We are hoping to upload instructions onto the internet about how to do this at some point in the near future. So keep your eyes open for that. When you upload your photos, there is some information that we on the comms team need in order to use your photos effectively. Photographer credit. We are legally required to display photographer credit, so this one is important. The name of the country and, if applicable, the city where the photo was taken. The name and or a brief description of the event taking place in the image. And lastly, and specifically for photos of workers, because we are trying to change narratives and humanize our workers and their organizations, if you can include the name of the worker or workers pictured and their organization name, that would help us immensely with our captions. Of course, that only applies if there's only like 1 or 2 workers pictured. If there's like lots, then obviously that would take up a lot of time, so don't worry about it then. But this is really all we need from you. But if you have other relevant info that you want to include, we can definitely make use of that too. When you've finished uploading your photos, you can notify Kendra and I either by sending a separate email, or you can click the share button for that file and write in our email addresses. Kendra and I will receive an automatic email when you do this, which we hope will simplify things for you. And finally, if any part of this is confusing and you want a bit more instruction, I can absolutely walk you through this on Skype or at the next team retreat, or just shoot me an email. And I've also put in a couple of Google Docs in the photo and video for archive folder, just with a checklist and screenshots of how to do this as well. Next slide. So moving on to publications, as part of our proactive approach to seizing the narrative, we in comms have also been thinking about how we want our publications to feed into our overarching goal. We've been shifting some of our focus in this area, which you will see reflected in the publication's request form on the internet. The questions we ask there are important not only because they help us understand what the practical needs are, translation, design requirements, etc., but also because they help us to understand what you are hoping to achieve with the document, what debates and/or policies you want to contribute to, whose minds you are trying to change, and what change you are hoping to see on the ground, and so forth. A key part of this is understanding the audience you want to reach out to and what you want them to do with the product you are making. From the comms perspective, how we would market that product to a worker MBO as opposed to a policymaker would be quite different. And knowing who and what to change means we can be far more strategic about everything we do, from editing to design to marketing, etc. Meaning we are far more likely to achieve the change that you want to have happen. Next slide, please. A successful example I have is the WIEGO's childcare campaign. This is from a few years ago, but it is an example of how we can be more targeted in our approach. Most of you probably know about this campaign, but for those of you who don't, in brief, WIEGO's social protection team worked with multiple organizations to contribute to a worldwide campaign advocating for informal workers' access to quality childcare. Rachel Musier and I worked with a designer to create a series of related products that represented workers from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. It took a lot of back and forth between the workers we wanted to represent, Rachel and I, and the designer before we achieved the final design that you see here. Next slide, please. So with this design, we were able to ensure workers saw themselves represented by depicting all our work sectors, as well as the various environments they work in, urban, slum, rural. We also aim to encourage uptake and buy-in for the campaign by translating the materials into multiple languages spoken by the MBOs involved in the campaign. And I want to emphasize that we were able to achieve this not because the social protection team knew exactly what they wanted in the design before we began producing these materials, but because they had a clear goal with these materials. And because of user feedback, we knew the audience they were trying to represent, as well as those they were trying to reach. And because we knew that, we were able to work with them to develop a design that served their needs. And it worked, though these campaign materials have been used by multiple organizations around the world in many languages and countries and have contributed to a global conversation about childcare. And that concludes my publications. I'm going to hand this back to Kendra.
Thanks, Megan. So if we just go to the next slide, that kind of concludes the portion, the formal portion, in discussing, comms processes and how they fit into achieving our vision of seizing the narrative around the informal economy. We wanted to open the floor. We've got quite a bit of time for questions, comments, or discussion. We just put some questions here for discussion, but if people have particular questions, then we'll do our best to answer those. So I see that Mike is raising his hand. So if you want to take the floor, Mike, I don't know if I have to unmute your microphone. Yep, okay, good.
I think I can unmute myself. Thank you. Thanks very much, folks. Question about on photos. I've heard it said that we feel like we're a bit short of photos in some areas. Is that still true? And if so, what photos are we particularly short of? What should people be looking out for?
Yes, and actually Carlin can probably speak to this one too. For the blog, oh, I should have written this down beforehand. That's a really good question. I think we were looking at some photos in India that we are missing street vendor photos. That would be nice to have more street vendor photos. Also, more like what we don't have a lot of right now are photos from Mexico. We have some, but we could use way more photos of street vendors from Mexico, and photos of informal workers in general, because we don't have very much for them at all. Carolyn, and off the top of your head, can you think of?
Yeah, I would just add that's a great question, Mike. We have tons of gorgeous photos of individual workers, but we're really trying to have more images that represent organizing. And we honestly don't have a lot of great things with worker meetings sort of outside, or we just have a couple of these that we end up using over and over. So the strength of the group is something that I think that we could definitely use. Representatives, I guess, the photo that Megan showed earlier, sort of that, workers pointing at a chart, and sort of the process of organizing and learning and capacity building and these types of things. We have the work part, but not the other part as much. Trying to think of some of the other things that come up often that we are missing. Oh, I know, some of the theme areas, like childcare, for example. We have a couple of fantastic ones from the Getty image collection, but there's just a couple, so we end up using those a lot.
And those are only from a few countries too. If we get more of those from more countries, that would be amazing too. Because I think we just have some from India and from South Africa, mostly.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I would say is we have a lot of photos from ILO meetings and things, but there are a lot of these broad shots of audience with, everyone with their headphones on. So really good shots of workers standing up in front of key audiences and showing that aspect too would also be fantastic. So some really, really thoughtful shots in those directions, because we have a lot, but we often can't use them, or they just don't have the impact that we would like them to have. Thanks for asking. That's a great question. We should probably keep a running document just so people can access that while they are out in the field.
That's what I was thinking, yeah, just to get the word out so people know what to look out for.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Yeah.
This is Leslie. Can I wade in on just a quick point on what we need in photos?
Sure.
I just wanted to say that, an awful lot of meeting shots come in that are sort of, we get a huge volume of them, but many of them don't have people looking engaged, or they're just sitting listening, and so they look, whether or not they're engaged,
just say
they
it,
don't
Leslie.
look great. And there's always a million water bottles on the table. And if people could just rather than a high volume of a whole bunch of meeting shots, just a few, particularly of people from different organizations in different regions in the world, sharing ideas or, really engaging with one another, those would be gold. But as always, when we're, particularly on websites and social media, it's people's faces and eyes that really draw people. So engaged, human faces are a really, really important piece.
Thanks, Leslie. And thanks, Carlin and Megan, for your insights on that. I think it's a great idea for us to sort of think about putting together this running document of what shots we really need from what locations and what types of photos we'd like. I see that Caroline is raising her hand, so I'll give her the floor.
So Kendra, just 2 points. Or perhaps to start out by saying that it was just wonderful. So thank you so much. It's so helpful to visualize what's happening behind the scenes. So, and just for us to all pause and be a bit more conscious about how we make use of you guys. So one thought about the photos. I mean, I love the idea of all of us upping our game photo-wise, and perhaps if we could compile this list and you guys could perhaps add it and have an intranet posting that both helps us, you know, that reminds us of the guide of what makes a good photograph. You know, maybe some of the uploading suggestions that you've highlighted too, but then highlights what you think are critical gaps. So it just means we all like a little bit more useful on that. So I had a bit of a question, and I know you guys have been fabulous about having a kind of upbeat tone, but I did want to kind of pose a provocative question to say, to, you know, on all these fronts, if it's the events or the publications, and particularly on the events, if you could reflect a little bit about what your worst case scenario is. So, you know, it's also like highlighting, we know how ideally we want to work, but where are the moments that we as team come back, and I know it's probably, you know, I can predict what you're going to say, but I think it's quite useful for us to also think through where are the moments where we're putting undue pressure on you guys. So yeah.
Great. I think that maybe Talua might be best placed to take that, and then Megan or I can complement.
I think as soon as Caroline asked the question, there were like 20 things in my head and they all jumped out. But I think really it is, in terms of when things aren't planned properly and you literally come last minute and say, okay, I mean, I guess probably a publication. If you want a publication last minute, that may be the most frustrating thing, because you want a publication, you want it printed, and all of these things are not just dependent on us. There's editing which needs to be done before we can even, you know, go to the design process, and it needs to come back, and, you know, it's something which takes weeks, and sometimes you may give us as little as 2 weeks notice, and this is not the only thing we're working on. So that can be a bit of a nightmare. From the event standpoint, it is also bad because, like, as we would have stated earlier, there's sometimes that there are multiple events taking place. And I mean, I guess Kendra can speak to social media promotion, but a lot of the time, you know, you may say, okay, I just want an event page, and you haven't really thought it through. But then afterwards, it's like you get an email and it's like, oh, and something else. It's like, but, you know, we didn't discuss this at the beginning. So I don't know. I think that, you know, what really needs to be done is that, you know, we really think ahead of time, you know, what do I really need? Like, you know, what is a must have? And I think it's something that we need to do going forward, because in the past we have overextended ourselves, you know, even when things came in like with really, 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 really crazy timing. Like you get something like, hey, I've gotten requests for event pages literally like, okay, it's Friday and the event is happening Monday. And I just happened to check my email at 5 p.m., which if I hadn't, I would see it on Monday. And I'm like, did you just this moment get an email letting you know about this event? And also something which happens, which is also nightmarish for me, I will check the event calendar regularly, and there wouldn't be a Y, because, you know, you usually put a Y when communication support is required. And then they decide to put a Y after the fact. So like, I've been checking this thing, you know, I check it every week, and then they put it a couple days before the event, and they're not going to notify me. So at this point, it's like, what are you really doing? But that's all I can really think of. I mean, there are multiple times things have happened and we try to work together, but I guess for us, what we really have to do as a team is to be realistic and come together and decide, okay, if you're coming to me last minute, this is what you can get and this is what you won't be able to get.
Yeah, and I think I would just add to that is sort of the most obvious thing that happens is that, you know, perhaps if we were notified late about an event, in some ways the events process is kind of like the linchpin for other things. So, you know, it triggers sometimes if you're wanting to do a new publication or a new briefing document for that particular event, that's where we would expect to hear about it. You know, printing, if something needs to be translated. So if that process is not followed effectively, then it puts undue pressure on us.
and so in some ways that might mean some of the colleagues are working over a holiday weekend, because we're all trying to do the best that we can, and we as comms we really want to get WIEGO's work out there, but it places some undue pressure in terms of boundaries on us, and we're trying to push back a little bit, I would say, just from a work-life balance perspective. But it's also a thing of I think missed opportunity sometimes, because I think what I imagine is that on the program team, some of you are doing multiple events a year. It's you're participating in workshops, you're writing, you're doing all these things, and then you have an event that's coming up, and maybe you don't perceive it as being particularly important. Oh, it's just another ILO conference where I'm presenting a paper. But in effect, if the goal of your program is that you want to be reaching, for example, in law, if you want to be reaching law practitioners and lawyers with information on how informal workers are affected by a particular type of international law, or urban policy or whatnot, it's just a missed opportunity if we don't know how important the event is, or if we don't know how what you're presenting fits into a debate. It's just a missed opportunity to reach the audience and to potentially change a mindset. Obviously, you'll be doing that at the event itself, but I think there's always an opportunity to amplify what we're doing in an online space as well, for people that can't attend the event in person. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Caroline, and I don't know if Megan, if you had anything else you wanted to add to that.
Just that while you were talking, I was thinking there's this great graph out there. I can't remember where I saw it last, but it's 3 things, and you can have 2 of them. So one of them is, I think, cheap, one of them is fast, and one of them is high quality. So pick 2. Yeah, and that's kind of, I feel, rings really true for what we as comms can do. We can do something cheap, but we can't. That doesn't mean, and fast, but then means that we're sacrificing quality. Or you can do something fast and have high quality, but it's not going to be cheap, et cetera, et cetera.
That's a really good point. that the quality may also suffer, which is not what we want at all.
So just to follow on to say absolutely, that answers my question beautifully. And I think the thing that strikes me in some of the case studies that you've given us, particularly around some of the social protection content, is how they have, and I have to say we don't do this as urban policies enough, but how they really factored all the comms issues right from the outset. And that's kind of one of the messages that I kind of walk away with, in terms of using you guys effectively. It's really planning ahead, but not at the time where I'm producing my output, but when I'm actually thinking about what the output should be. So I don't know if that's correct, but that was my takeaway.
Definitely. That's a very, very good takeaway, that, the thinking through who you want to influence and what kind of information you want them to be taking away is key in planning. The type of even the language that you use and the format of the document is definitely key. And yeah, so as we mentioned, part of the publication's requirements form sort of hopes to get a little bit at the crux of getting people to sort of think through what debates they're contributing to and what audiences they're wanting to reach with this document. Tries to do that. So that was a great question. Is there any other burning questions that anybody else has, or challenges that you face in integrating sort of a strategic approach to comms in your own work, or things that are working or not working in the current processes? I think be also useful to us to understand, you know, what some of the challenges that you face are in terms of working with us.
Can I just say a really quick thing just before, and then people can certainly jump in and answer your question as well. But just on the point about last minute requests, you can say no, right? It's absolutely fair enough. I'm just reiterating what we were saying in Lima last year at the team retreat. It's fine. If you get something on a Friday for a Monday and you've got plans for that weekend, there is no way that you need to change your plans a bit. No one has to do that because it's not okay. It's not all right for people to and I don't think people genuinely expect that sort of turnaround. So this is to give permission to everyone, please, to say no to unreasonable requests, because it's not reasonable. And if you feel like it's essential to not only just say no, then how about some kind of really, really great general purpose communications tool, some fact sheet that people can use in almost any circumstance, and you say, and you just send them that and say, this is what we can do when we get 1 day's notice. Here you go. Because the thing about opportunities is there will always be another one. And if we didn't take this one, don't worry. And if we didn't take it because someone didn't let you know in time, that's not your problem.
Thanks for saying that, Mike.
No problem.
I think, everybody on the team is really committed to trying to get our work out there. But yeah, I think it's a really good point that, we do as people need to have boundaries and weekends. Those are nice to have. So thank you for making that point. I'm seeing that if there's one quick question or comment that anybody wants to add, I'll give you a minute, but if not, I think
Kendra, I have one comment. I want to add as well my voice to Caroline. This is a wonderful presentation and something that we need to do as often as we can. So I encourage the comms team to at least take one slot minimum every 6 months to keep us all always reminding about all the wonderful things we can do comm-wise. One extra thing I wanted to mention in regards to photos is that, and I know Megan is probably working on it, but one thing to remind everybody else is the action shots of the hot spots and the hot activities that the workers had to face, like the protests, the evictions, the hard moments. So those are pictures I think we are lacking a bit. So if people have those ones in archive, if we can remind people to share those ones with us, focal cities activities, focal cities workers living the hard moments and facing, the hard moments of their day-to-day, that will be good photos to have. So that's just my only extra add-on to a conversation or point that already was discussed. And I add my voice to Mike. Saying no is healthy. And I know I'm a big promoter of that. So we just have to enforce people to follow the process and the procedures. So just be good at that.
Thanks, Pilar. And I agree. Yeah, it is the point on also reflecting the difficult moments that many informal workers face is also really important in depicting kind of the reality of informality. So with that, I think we're coming to the end of our time. So I just say as closing, thank you so much for taking the hour out of your morning or afternoon. We hope that we've at least scratched the surface in terms of telling you how, how we're hoping that the comms processes help us take a strategic and planned approach to communications to have the maximum influence. And if you have any burning questions or comments, please do feel free to send those to us following the webinar. We're always looking to, you know, improve our process, and yeah, really want to work with you on doing that. So thanks. And I think Pilar or Caroline may have one final remark or two. We've also just provided a couple of resources here, which are quick links in the last slide, which will be circulated after the presentation. So I'll just hand it over to Pilar or Caroline.
So just a huge thank you, and to echo what Pilar said about using this space. You know, I think that in all the craziness of what we do, just pausing and looking at these issues is enormously helpful. So really to use webinars and the whole comms team to make use of it going forward would be lovely. Also to echo this request to say no, I think that we have particularly when there's kind of activist moments where we think we can change the world, we put a lot of pressure on all our team members, and I think that really it is to give you permission to say no. And I think if you do, it'll force us to plan better. So you know, I think you don't let us mistreat you, and then we'll all get into better habits. And then just finally to say, we meet again on the 25th of July, and this time we shift register, and it's a social protection focus. So the title of the presentation, so it's Laura, Rachel, and Cyrus, is what does an informal worker perspective on social protection mean? So yeah, please join us again in 2 weeks' time. And thanks for everybody, and particularly Pilar for all her diligent behind the scenes help. Yeah, see you again soon.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you. Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.